We are very excited to have Karey Windbiel-Rojas presenting today on the topic of spring cleaning, where indoor pests could be hiding. Karey is the Associate Director for Urban and Community IPM with UC IPM and an Urban IPM Advisor for Yolo, Solano, and Sacramento counties. As Associate Director, Karey provides leadership and coordinates communication and educational efforts to address urban pest issues around homes, structures, landscapes, gardens, schools, and public areas. Thank you for joining us today, Karey.
Thank you for
Share
having me.
your slides and begin.
Yeah, great. Do that. All right. So it is spring, and lots of people talk about spring cleaning, and I myself have been thinking about cleaning and decluttering and trying to get rid of some excess stuff in the house. But of course, we at IPM always are thinking about pests, and that leads me to want to talk to everyone about spring cleaning and pests and where pests might be hiding. Uh, some of the information you'll see might lead you to jump out of your chairs when we're done today and go clean up some areas. Or it's just stuff to keep in mind for later and when you are cleaning or storing or bringing new stuff into the house. As we have heard from past presentations where we've covered pantry pests and other different kinds of pests, and you'll see some of that today. Pests can be in many places in the home. Uh, Obviously, I just mentioned pantry pests, so pests can be in our food storage areas, in the kitchen, or in pantries, or in walk-in pantry areas, or wherever you store food. We can have pests, but they can also be in the garage when they get in there, and you might have a nice and tidy garage. You might have a cluttered garage, but pests can get in anywhere. But pests can also be in our bedrooms, in our closets, and in furniture and in carpet and lots of different places in the house. I'm not able to talk about all the potential pests today, but I am going to cover a few of the main ones and some places where you might not consider ever thinking a pest might be in. So when you find a pest in the house, solving infestations and figuring out what to do might take a little bit of detective work. You see something flying, or you see a beetle, and you say, where did this come from? And hopefully today, what we cover will allow you to know what other sort of weird places you may be finding pests in the house that you wouldn't have thought. And understanding what these pests are feeding on and what conditions allow them to thrive are things that we can try and manage with integrated pest management. Now, when we're talking about spring cleaning and pests in the house, your house does not need to look like this in order to harbor pests. Pests can be in places, even in tidy houses, where there's just the right kind of material that pests like. So we're not talking about dirty homes. We're not trying to shame you. Pests can get in anywhere. And it's just something that we wanted to think about with offering this webinar when people often think about spring cleaning. So, hopefully our houses don't look like this, but even if they do, there's cleaning that can be done to eliminate hiding places for pests. Many of the pests that I'll talk about today are very small and they can go unnoticed. You can see in the picture on the left that there are two little beetles there that are next to a penny, and that gives you an indication of the size. Many of the pictures that I'll show today show these pests really large, but that's only so that you can see them. But in context, many of these pests are super small, which allow them to be missed. And then the picture that's on the lower right shows a few beetles that are on some dried fruit. And that's something that maybe a lot of people don't consider, that some of these pests could be in fruit material or dried fruit, just not knowing the wide range of some of the food or other materials that some of these indoor pests like to feed upon. So I am going to talk about some pantry pests today, and we call them pantry pests because they're often in our kitchens or pantries, but there are other materials around our houses that are not considered foodstuffs by us, or that are not considered things that we would put in the pantry. But the pests don't care where you put them. They want to feed on the favorite foods that they have, no matter where you have some of these materials. To define, though, what pantry pests are, and we have talked about pantry pests in past webinars, so I will go through some of that material again and then show you some resources at the end where you can learn more about pantry pests, both the ones that I'm showing and others. But what pantry pests are things that are around our food, whether you have an actual pantry or not. But they can be beetles or moths that feed on our stored food. And the foods can be cereals or grains, even spices, dried fruit, like I just showed, candy, chocolate, different kinds of herbs. So there's a lot of different plant-based materials that pantry pests will attack and eat. By having pantry pests in our food, they can contaminate our food either with their droppings, their waste products, or by the females laying their eggs. Some of these pantry pests create webbing, and sometimes they lose their body parts. And so that can all contaminate our edible food. And because of their feeding, it might open up the food to different kinds of fungi or bacteria, which can cause the food to rot. One of the pests that we see in California, that's one of the main important pests of stored food, are the sawtooth grain beetles. These feed on a wide variety of different cereals and dried fruit and powdered milk. They can feed on pasta and nuts and candy, lots of different things. And in the upper picture, you can see the reason this beetle is called the sawtooth grain beetle is because they have these little spikes right here on this portion just behind their head that looks like a saw. And so these little teeth, sawtooth grain beetle. So a lot of insects are named by either what they eat or certain characteristics. So that's one. And obviously, these are not that big. This picture shows them really huge, but the lower picture shows two sawtooth grain beetle adults on some oats. And you know that oats are very small. So that gives you perspective of how small these are. And because a lot of these pests are really small, they can go unnoticed in our food. So they are brown, they are kind of flattened body, and these are the adults, and the larvae look a little different too. I will go there just a moment. Nope, I don't have a picture of the larvae, but the larvae kind of look like caterpillars, but this is a beetle. And they do develop pretty quickly. Their life cycle is 30 to 50 days, so their population can really ramp up quickly if they go undetected and unmanaged. Another pest that I want to talk about that can be in our pantries and our food and in the kitchen, but also where we might have other plant material, is the Indian meal moth. This is one of the most common moths that is found in the kitchen. The larvae feed on cereals similar to that sawtooth grain beetle, feed on cereals and flours, also rice, dried fruit, dried nuts, and yes, even chocolate. I have found one in my house in the chocolate before, and it was chocolate that was sitting back there in the pantry that I didn't know. And I said, "Oh, great. I've got some leftover chocolate here." And I opened it up, and there was webbing, and there was the larva that is in this middle picture here that looks, it is a caterpillar because this is a moth. And I was really bummed that I didn't get to eat that chocolate, but it probably wasn't very good because it was so old. Well, anyway, But yeah, the adult moth, which is the upper right picture, the female will lay eggs, and the eggs can go undetected until it turns into a larva, and then we see the larvae, and it makes silken threads where you can see in the lower picture here, where you've got some of this webbing that's inside a bag of grain. And these only take 6 to 8 weeks to develop from the egg to the adult stage. So again, they can develop very quickly if left untreated. The Indian meal moth likes a lot of different foods. I mentioned that on the last slide, but some things that you might not consider that you may have either in the kitchen or elsewhere in the house that they also feed on includes potpourri. And again, not everything's found in the kitchen, so the Indian meal moth won't just stay there. It'll find the food that it likes. And some of these other things that I mentioned already, but including crackers and cornmeal and even hot chocolate mix. They like birdseed, and you can see in this picture on the left of these two, some of the excrement that is left behind in this birdseed, because the Indian meal moth infestation in this bag of birdseed was pretty high. So all of these little things that you can kind of see in between the seeds, that is the droppings or frass of the moth, plus some webbing. And you can see in the picture on the right, all of the pistachios here, and you can see some of that frass and webbing. Here is a picture of a moth that where my cursor is, and you can see some other moth pictures. So, it really has spoiled this food stuff. Other things that you may not think of that you might find these moths are in, decorative materials that you have in the house that have seeds on them, or even oatmeal bath soap. It will attack the oatmeal, so you may not think about that. So again, you may have this oatmeal bath soap in the bathroom, and if you're seeing moths around and wondering what they're attacking, it could be that. And anything else, rice saved from weddings or rice that you might have as food, and things that have any kind of food stuff. If you leave your shop vacs with debris in them, they can find food that they like and get in there. So really wide range of material that the Indian meal moth can find in your house. Now, Indian meal moths and clothes moths, people often confuse the two or wonder, is it an Indian meal moth that they have that's a kitchen pest, or is it a clothes moth? And especially if you have any of those materials in the bedroom, you might think, oh, I have clothes moths. But clothes moths and the Indian meal moths are a bit different. Those meal moths are larger, so the clothes moths are smaller, and these two pictures show two different species of clothes moths. Though the one at the top is the adult of the webbing clothes moths, and the one at the bottom are case-making clothes moths. So both of these have different colors than the Indian meal moth, and they're a bit smaller. They also have a bit of tufts on their heads, and then that will distinguish them from the Indian meal moth. And they don't fly the same way. They sort of flutter instead of flying like a typical moth. But clothes moths will feed on slightly different things than the Indian meal moth. They mostly feed on wool clothing. They will feed on carpets and rugs, upholstered furniture. They'll feed on furs and other items that have wool, even wool blends with cotton they'll feed on. They feed on animal bristles and brushes. So if you have a dog or a cat and you leave some of the material around, they can feed on that. They will feed on the wool felt pads in pianos. And I'm going to talk about another pest that also feeds on materials within pianos, and fish meal that's in fish food. So the clothes moth isn't only feeding on clothes, but it will feed primarily on clothes and other things. And what the damage looks like, here you can see in this bottom picture is some of the feeding damage to this wool shirt. And they do chew. The larvae have chewing mouth parts, so they chew on the wool. And the case-making clothes moth that you can see in the upper picture, they take some of the fibers and they make a little sort of hiding place. And so they'll wrap themselves up in that. And the color of the case matches the threads and the material of the fabric that they have been feeding on. And then all of these little dots here, those are the frass or the fecal material that the caterpillar has left behind. And inside each one of these little cases is a caterpillar of the moth. And so you may not see them. They tend to hide when they're disturbed. So you may have an infestation that has been there for months and it goes unnoticed, especially if it's an item that you don't wear all the time or a sweater that you put away for the spring or summer. And you go back to it in the winter and find that it's been chewed on. And they usually do, the clothes moths, they fly around only in the immediate area where the infestation is. So if you're finding any of these around your room or your closet, that's a good indication that that is where you're going to then discover some of these, the larval stage. And you can, of course, clean the clothes or launder them, take them to the dry cleaner. But a way to prevent the clothes moths is to store any of the materials containing wool in tight fitted bins or some place that you can exclude the clothes moths. You can kill the different stages of the moth by freezing or by heating or fumigating with dry ice. You can get traps. In some cases, you can use insecticides, but the best way is to either clean or launder the material and then store them so that the moths can't get to them. Shifting to another kind of indoor pest, this is the warehouse beetle. And this is a really small beetle, but it shows here as being giant. You can see it's 2 millimeters, and the lower picture is the larval stage. And the upper picture is the adult stage. These feed on cereals, candy, that hot chocolate, cocoa mix, cookies, pet foods, dry beans, pasta, spices. So a really big array of food. And the female can lay up to 90 eggs and will infest the food by laying her eggs there. And the larvae have these little bristles, and those bristles can shed in the food. And if someone eats it, it can cause irritation to their mouth or esophagus or digestive tract. And they do develop pretty quickly, like the other beetles that I mentioned. I mentioned the sawtooth grain beetle already, and here's that larva. So I do have a picture of the larval stage. So the larvae kind of look like caterpillars, but these are the larval stage of beetles. And they can go unnoticed, especially if it's a grain or flower that they match the color of. But as I mentioned before, the sawtooth grain beetle is a very important beetle in stored food areas and can feed on a wide range of foods, including, and I didn't say this in the other one, coconuts and pet food and bird seed and lots of things. So these will develop in about 4 weeks and can rapidly increase. Another kind of indoor pest that people may not think of are the cigarette beetles. And you don't have to be a smoker and have cigarettes in order to have this beetle, because they not only will feed on tobacco products, they will also feed on flour and dried fruit and cereal and cocoa and coffee and herbs and dog food and a lot of the things that some of the other pests I've already covered also will infest. But I was brought a sample of some beetles that somebody found, and she found them in her bedroom, and she couldn't figure out what they were doing there. And I identified it as the cigarette beetle, and we were talking about what she might have in her bedroom. And she wasn't a smoker, and there wasn't anything that she could think of. So I asked if she has lavender eye pillows, because these will feed on dried herbs. So if you have a lavender eye pillow or any sachets that you might have in your room for, your drawers or whatnot, these beetles can get into those. And she didn't have anything like that, but finally she looked through her drawers and found that she had some cigars that a family member had brought to her when they traveled to Cuba or something, and they brought her cigars. She didn't smoke them, but they were sitting there in her nightstand, and that was turned out to be the source of the beetles. So here you can see these beetles on this cigar box, and things that you overlook that you may not think would be a harborage place can definitely be a source of food for these beetles. And so this picture at the bottom shows the adult, shows it kind of large, but they are only 2 to 3 millimeters long, and they're really small beetles. The life cycle is a little longer than some of the other ones, and it's dependent on temperature, like a lot of insect development is, and it might take 40 to 90 days for them to go from egg to adult. So there again is the picture of the cigarette beetle, and this is what the larval stage look like. This makes it look huge, but they are still really small. Oops. And oh, I got lost. There we go. So there's another beetle that looks really similar to the drugstore, the cigarette beetle, and it's called the drugstore beetle. And it will feed on some of the items that the cigarette beetle will feed on, but they also feed on pharmaceuticals. So the drugstore beetle first got its name because it was found in, drugstores and pharmacies where it would not only feed on some of the items that a drugstore would keep, but also the drugs, the pharmaceuticals. And these two look really similar to each other, but that source, wherever you're finding it, may help you identify which one it is. And the female lays her eggs in the materials, the egg develops into the larvae, and the larvae do the majority of the damage in the feeding. And this one will in about 2 months from egg to adult as well. Another beetle, kind of the same thing, feeds on lots of different grains and nuts and candies and dried fruit, also drugs. There's a couple beetles in this group called the confused beetle and the red flower beetle. And they don't just feed on flour, as you can see. They will feed on other materials as well. And they do kind of resemble the sawtooth grain beetle, but they're slightly different. And this one will take about 6 weeks to develop from egg to adult. Now there's other beetles to talk about as well. And there's weevils, which are in the beetle order of insects. And there are many more even than this. So I'm going to switch to different pests after this. I think you get the picture here that there are many different kinds of beetles, weevils, and moths that can feed on a number of items in our homes, in the kitchen, outside the kitchen, in the bedrooms, wherever we have the food they like, they will potentially find it and feed on it. And by the time you notice it, you could have a pretty good size infestation. So always inspect your food when you've brought it in. And if you find something, try to identify what it is and then find the source and see if you can clean it up. And when we get to the end of the talk today, I will show you resources where you can find more information because there's a lot I want to cover today and I can't go through everything. So there's also outdoor pests that will just kind of find their way indoors and they might thrive indoors. They might just be incidental, occasional pests. So I want to go through a couple of these as well. Carpet beetles, which are both indoor and outdoor. The problems that we find with carpet beetles are because of mostly the larval stage. And the adults are pollen feeders. So here's the adult beetle in the upper left corner, feeding on pollen of a flower. And we often will bring in carpet beetle adults on cut flowers that we bring in, but the adults do fly and they can fly into our homes or by opening doors and causing kind of, a suction of air that can bring in these really small beetles as well. And the adults feed on pollen, but they will lay their eggs in food stuff uh, for the larvae. And I don't mean food that we will eat. I mean carpet and wool, but the larvae will also feed on feathers and fur. They feed on insect body parts that might be left around if there are insect parts, in corners or areas where insects have died. Or if you're entomologists like some of us, we have insect collections. Maybe you have some decorative insects that are in a shadow box on the wall. They will feed on those. But again, they feed on wool and knitting materials and other things. So while the adult is a pollen feeder and lives outside, the larval stage feeds on these other materials. In the picture in the upper right, you can see this is some artwork that's actually by my kids. And I had this artwork in storage and it was yarn and some beans and there's pasta on here and some googly eyes. Well, I saved my kids' artwork and I had it in a bin that really did not have a tight fitting lid, I came to discover. So when I was doing some cleaning a couple years back, I found that the whole bin of all these art projects that I saved from their preschool years had been infested with carpet beetles. So you can see these little larvae. These are all live larvae. And so having to throw that stuff away, and I should know better, but there's other things in my house that they could feed on as well. Here is a mask with fur. This is with feathers. This is a Mardi Gras mask that I have, and it hasn't been attacked by carpet beetles because I have it in storage, but there's potential for these carpet beetles to attack it. So here you can see in the lower picture, this is a close-up of a feather, and this is one of the species of carpet beetles that is feeding on those feathers, and that's the larval stage. So they do feed on a variety of dead animals and animal products, in addition to wool and silk and some leather and fur, as I mentioned, hairbrushes with natural bristles, pet hair. So there's a lot of potential for foods for these carpet beetles that we might have in our house. And they might feed on spices and grains, but all the other ones that I was talking about, that's really what they like. The carpet beetles feed on different things. They don't feed on synthetic fiber. They like natural fibers. So even if we have carpet that's a mix of wool and synthetic fibers, they can still do some damage. And this is the one that I mentioned earlier with the piano, that they sometimes feed on the felt or hammers in pianos, and they can become really badly infested, and the damage will affect the piano and how it works, and you may have to actually replace some parts. I'm going to switch from insects to rodents, and we do have a webinar that we produced a couple years ago on integrated pest management for rodents. So I'm not going to tell you everything there is to know about rodents right now. I will refer you to that recorded presentation. But these rodents can get into our houses, and they can also be harbored by clutter or things in the house that we might need to adjust or clean up, because they could be good hiding places for rats. So we've got Norway rats, we have roof rats, there's mice, both house mouse and deer mouse. And I'm not going to go over all of them, but I just wanted to discuss the rats. The Norway rat is also known as sewer rats. They are brown. They build burrows along buildings and underneath garbage and wood piles, mostly outdoors, right? But they do come inside. They can invade basements and they tend to be more on the ground level. They are really good swimmers and they'll feed on all kinds of material. They'll feed on grains and cereals, but also meat and fish and nuts, some fruit, pretty much the same foods that some of the pantry pests will feed on, but they'll feed on lots of other material as well. Then we have roof rats, also called black rats. So the Norway rat is usually, at sort of ground level. Roof rats are usually up higher. They have more of a darker coloring and they are really good climbers. So you will find them in above ground areas, in nests. They nest in vegetation that's above the ground. And you're going to find them more in ceilings and in walls, cabinets, roofs. So think roof rat, they're going to be up a little higher. And they too will feed on a wide variety of food materials. And to be able to distinguish a rat versus a mouse, the UCIPM website has lots of information for you to help you identify which one you have, and both based on the feces and the size of the feces, but also various features such as their tail or size of their eyes or size of their ears. So with any pest, you do want to identify it first so that you can know the best method of controlling it. And as I mentioned, the roof rat and the Norway rat do occupy different spaces, but they can be present in our homes at the same time. Boy, my mouse is a little touchy today. So the roof rat likes warmer areas, and Norway rats are usually found at the bottom, and roof rats are found more in the upper areas of a house or a building. And while they tend to be outdoors and they nest outdoors, they do come in because we have food that they like. So not only the food that I mentioned, but also pet food and garbage, indoor garbage, or they can be around dumpsters, and outdoor garbage. They can be around compost. They can be pests of chicken coops. So wherever there's food, you will find rats. And they hide in either underground burrows or thick vegetation. So with all this vegetation in this photo in the upper right, you can see, while it looks lovely, ivy and other kinds of vegetation can harbor roof rats. And they will be able to hide in clutter and also wood piles and any kind of debris that keeps them safe. And then they'll come in and cause some of this damage. So the lower picture, this is feeding damage by a rat that's found the foodstuffs. So they found the oats and they found the crackers and anything that is not stored properly. So a way to keep rats from getting to our food and wanting to come in is, having good housekeeping. And, most people want to do that anyway, but it's essential that we try and think about what can be attractive or inviting pests in by leaving out dishes or having, trash that's not in a tight fitting lid, or trash that's not emptied, or having clutter in the garage or clutter in the house that can be hiding places. So you want to store your food securely, take out the garbage, reduce these hiding places, and in some cases, remove dense vegetation. And sometimes that's really hard to do when you have neighbors where you might be keeping your house and your yard in good conditions, but your neighbor may not. And so sometimes rat management will take a neighborhood in order to get good control. And how you deal with that can be kind of challenging if your neighbor's not willing to clean things up. But you can try to rodent-proof your home so at least they don't get in by eliminating entryways and gaps that are larger than a quarter inch, sealing some cracks, looking at the plumbing and vents and cables and any places that they can get in. And I don't want to spend too much time on this because, again, we have a whole other webinar on IPM for rodents, but some things that you might consider for keeping rodents out. I'm going to switch to a couple other insects to sort of wrap it up today that you may not hear of very much because they're somewhat uncommon, but when you have the right conditions and the critter is there, they can definitely be a problem. So sosids are an insect that a lot of folks never even see because they are really, really small. These two pictures show them as very large, but they're less than 1/8 of an inch, so very, very tiny. They are called also book lice or bark lice, but they are not true lice. They're not like head lice, but they can be found in bark outdoors and they can be found in books. They are a potentially big problem in libraries and other places. So what these insects like are high humidity, and they feed on mold and mildew and also starchy materials. So if you have high humidity in your house and you've got cardboard boxes, or you've got areas that have mold or mildew, or books with the starchy binding, that's where these pests might be found. They will feed on the glue that keeps food boxes together, like cereal boxes or cracker boxes. So you can find these in your pantry, but you can also find them in your bookshelves. And they don't bite or damage wood, but and they don't bite us. And again, they're really small, but they can cause problems to our books, and they can just be a pest that we don't want around. And so they're a little different than the other pantry pests in that they're not necessarily found in our food, but they can be around our food. And so reducing humidity and removing any infested moldy items are a really great way to control those. And we, UCIPM, we don't have information on sosids on our website yet. And we'll make sure you have this link to read more about them from the University of Minnesota Extension. Silverfish and fire brats are insects that people may not recognize as insects. They look a little different, but these are often found outside the home, and then they can get into the house when the conditions are right for them. So the upper picture shows a silverfish, and the lower picture shows a fire brat. And these are soft-bodied insects. They don't have wings, so they crawl everywhere. They don't fly. If I saw one of these flying, I'd probably freak out. And then they have these kind of tail-like appendages. They are nocturnal and they hide during the day, so rarely are they seen. And they do feed on food like cereal, flour, pasta, but they will also feed on book bindings and starch and cardboard, wallpaper. They will feed on the glue or paste, and they too like high humid areas. So the difference between the two are really just in how they look. The silverfish looks a little silvery, so they're shiny and kind of pearlescent. They live in damp, warm places. Sometimes you find them in damp or wet wood, so you could find them in laundry rooms or in bathrooms, or maybe the fence or the gate where you might have some wood that's damp or rotting. But they will also feed on cardboard. So this upper picture, you can see some damage, quite extensive damage on cardboard from a fire brat. And so fire brats look a little different, that they're mottled in gray, and they too like warm, dry places. So different than the damp places that the silverfish, fire brats like a little warmer, drier places. So you can find them around ovens, heating units, fireplaces, hot water pipes. And then you can see some of the book material here that's being fed upon by the silverfish. So you want to keep basements and laundry rooms and bathrooms and showers clean and dry so that you don't have these in those areas. And also cleaning out closets and cabinets and any storage containers where you might have materials that they feed on or materials that some of the other pests that I'm talking about today will feed on. Earwigs, not typically thought of as an indoor pest. So wanted to talk about those today because earwigs can find their way inside. And earwigs, some people call them pincher bugs because they do have these pincher-like um, uh, body parts on the end of their tail, excuse me, end of their bodies. And so earwigs are generally outdoor insects that feed on plant materials, but they do enter homes when the conditions outside are changing, right? So when it's too dry, when it's too hot, when it's cold, they may make their way indoors. So they're more of a nuisance pest than actually coming in. They're not going to feed on carpet. They're not going to feed on your clothes, but they can find their way in and then they can hide in some of the areas. So again, we're thinking about spring cleaning. What can we clean up? What can we do to limit their hiding places? And so when they do get indoors, you can sweep them, you can vacuum them, you can, collect them and throw them back outside. But looking for ways where you can seal up entryways and limit shelter that's near buildings like mulch or leaves or other kinds of outdoor debris, and try to keep water away from your structure. They do like the moisture, and they are attracted to light, so you can replace your outdoor white lights with yellow lights. And lastly, spiders. We all know spiders. Spiders can be indoors, spider can be outdoors. There are some spiders that do better indoors, and some spiders you'll never find outdoors or indoors because they tend to be more outdoor dwelling spiders. But many different spiders can make their way indoors, especially if there are undisturbed areas that you may have shelter for them. So the black widow, which is in the lower left picture here, black widows like undisturbed areas. So if there's an area where you've been storing things and it's just sitting there, whether it's the closet or the corner of a room, you may find when you do go to clean that there could be some black widows. And black widows are venomous, so you want to be careful there. But there's also the common house dwelling yellow sac spider that's in the top picture here that you can see. And those are commonly found in the house. Spiders are predators. So in the home, they can eat some of these other pests or any flies or mosquitoes that might come into the house. So spiders are generally good and beneficial, but you may not want them in the house, especially the black widow that can bite us. But they do well in our indoor conditions. And this the adult marbled cellar spider down in the lower right picture is eating a fly. You can kind of see it there. So they have their benefits, but of course, people don't always want spiders or spider webs in the house. And so you can seal up cracks around the foundation. That'll block the earwigs from coming in, maybe block the spiders or other pests, and make sure that your window screens and door screens are in good shape and there's no way for these spiders to come in. And then, of course, cleaning up clutter, cleaning up areas where they can hide, and vacuuming their webs or using a broom to take down webs, what have you. All right, so I talked about a lot of things that you can do. So I'll just kind of summarize here for some of your pantry pests, keeping your food in tightly sealed containers with no way for the pests to get in. So take them out of those boxes and put them into jars with lids or some sort of container. You can put your food in the freezer. to kill any of the life stages of any of these pests, or you can store some food in the refrigerator so the pests can't get to them. It'll depend on how big your freezer or your refrigerator is, but at the very least, try and take things out of their bags or their original packaging and put them in airtight containers. And you want to clean the containers before reusing them. And every so often, like in our spring cleaning, taking everything out of the shelves and cleaning the shelves, because some of this food can drop onto our shelves, and then food that's in the corners of shelves or on the floor or anywhere can be just enough for any of these beetles or moths or even pests that I haven't talked about, like cockroaches, to feed on. So you want to just keep things tidy and use up your products. Or if you're not using them and they've been sitting there for a really long time, consider either donating them if they haven't been opened, but not if they're expired, or throwing them away or putting them in the compost or what have you. Another thing you can do to try and detect the pantry moths or the clothes moths, you can get pheromone traps for the Indian meal moth and for the clothes moths to detect them because they do hide really well. These pheromone traps will attract the males of the flying moths. They'll get stuck in these traps, and then that can let you know that you do have either pantry pests or you have clothes moths. And you just want to make sure that you're putting the right one in the right place. The clothes moths where you might have clothes, and the pantry pests where you might have some of their favorite stuff. But if you do have potpourri in the bathroom or potpourri in your room or lavender pillows, you can also get Indian meal moths in those areas. But they have different ones for the different ones. And so, yeah, try to prevent reinfestation, limit access to the food, throw away infested stuff, vacuum up your area frequently. So if you're going to spring clean and limit the clutter or storage or hiding places, vacuum up, clean cabinets, clean your pantries, and just keep things tidy. Any spilled foods, as I said, you want to try and clean those up, go through your drawers, inspect some of your clothes, and keep areas dry, keep the humidity low, and just kind of look around. And lots of different things here having to do with food stuff, but also getting rid of the dried fruit or any place that you might find that you have some of the food items that I talked about today. And for information on all these pests and many, many more, we have the UC IPM website. This is our homepage here, and then you're going to want to go to the home and garden page, ipm.ucanr.edu, and go to the home and landscape. You'll find this this web page. This is the way it looks today. As of next week, we will have a new look as we have been redesigning our website, both for updated looks and navigation, but also for ADA compliance, Americans with Disabilities Act compliance. But right now, this is what our website looks like. You'll find household pests here in this section, pests that bite, sting, or injure, wood destroying pests, some of the vertebrate pests like those rodents that I talked about. You can find our pest notes and our quick tips and some videos linked here, or you can go to the common pests down here and look up these household pests and some of the outdoor pests as well. So what our page will soon look like, and this is just a prototype, it's not the real website, but this is what it's going to look like probably next week. Could happen by tomorrow, but it's probably next week. So keep an eye out for that if you're used to seeing our website like that. And for lots of the pests that I talked about today, and many I didn't, we do have our recorded webinars on the UCIPM YouTube channel. We've got springtime household pests that goes into some of the carpet beetles a little bit more. I didn't talk about bed bugs, but those are big potential pests once they get into our house and find some harborage. Fleas, we've got a whole webinar on fleas, many more of those pantry pests there. And as I mentioned, the IPM for rodents. So have a look at our recording webinars and the UC IPM website, and hopefully you'll have a good time with your spring cleaning and you'll be able to prevent some of these pests from joining you in your house.
Thank you very much, Karey. That was a lot of information and we appreciate it.